Today is Sunday, September 23rd, 2012, and we're going to have a great show lined up for you this morning, and hope everybody's tuned in and welcoming their family and friends to tune in as well, because we're going to have a great show on two of the most pressing issues that I consider us facing today. Obviously, we have spiritual and moral issues that are facing us worldwide, but we have two issues, both the nuclear industry, some of the misgivings in that industry, and the threat of nuclear war, obviously, is always looming over our heads. And we're going to discuss that with Arnie Gunnarsson here in the first hour. And in the second hour, we're going to cover another pressing issue, which is genetically modified organisms. So we have two great issues lined up, and we also have two great guests that can discuss the issues and also solutions. And that's what we try to focus on here on Capital Forum on RBN, RepublicBroadcasting.org, is solutions. And a lot of people do a very good job of pointing out the problems that we have, but not very many people are out there actually trying to accomplish something, to actually learn lessons and actually make a difference in the world for all of us. And one of those people, obviously, is Arnie Gunnarsson. He's very much a household name, a household face, but if you have not heard of Arnie, he is a leading expert in the nuclear industry, has worked with many nuclear power plants, I believe 70-plus nuclear power plants, and very much just tons of experience in this field to speak towards some of the situations that's going on in our world, and obviously one of which is Fukushima. Arnie, are you with us this morning?
Yeah, hi. Happy second day of fall here.
Well, welcome to the show. Arnie, what did you do on summer vacation? I think you made a trip around the world, didn't you?
Yeah, I spent 10 days in Japan, actually. Yeah, I just got back.
Excellent. And we're going to have a 3-minute commercial break coming up just real quick, but Arnie, just briefly, why are you actually discussing this? Why aren't you like most nuclear experts and just sitting on the sidelines and just watching things happen as they play out? Why are you in the field actually trying to make a difference?
I was an expert on the 3 Mile Island trial, and I saw my government try to cover up 3 Mile Island. And when Fukushima happened, I told Maggie, I said, I don't care what the personal cost is. I'm going to prevent that from happening this time. So I really just dedicated the last 18 months to getting out there.
Excellent. And I wish more and more people would do the same thing you're doing, Arnie. I know we have to put you up on a pedestal somewhat as a leading expert in this field and admire what you're doing for the rest of us. But I wish you were just one of the 1,000 people that are doing the same thing. And we'll probably discuss that a little bit more on the other side of the break. And everybody, please support the sponsors of RBN, and we'll see you on the other side of the break.
The things of today.
Welcome back to Capital Forum, and thankfully to Maggie and Arnie Gunnarsson, they're not letting us forget about what happened in Fukushima and what could happen here in the United States, or just you name the country around the world, and an event like this could happen because we have nuclear power plants. And here in the United States, I believe we have 23 of those type of nuclear power plants that are in Fukushima. But Arnie, before the break, I actually mentioned, why are you one of the lone people that are speaking out? And also, have you met resistance from the nuclear industry itself and from the government of the United States on issues like this?
Yes, we have. You know, it's the NEI, the trade organization, constantly goes after us on Twitter feeds and things like that. And you know, whenever I'm out on the radio, there'll be I think they have a sheet, you know, let's go after Arnie by talking about these specific issues. But really, you know, I think that's a sign that the broader audience is listening. I mean, they wouldn't be attacking me if it wasn't making a dent in their bottom line. So I think you know, as people begin to listen and understand, the industry will dig in its heels and fight even harder.
And also part of that is the actual government itself. It seems like you've got some heavy-handedness coming back from the government, probably not only the United States, but from Japan as well.
Boy, you know, I've seen that. They are basically ignoring experts that are not inside. The Japanese call it the nuclear village. Here we call it the nuclear priesthood. But there's a couple of examples of that. The National Academy of Sciences was chartered to look at the Fukushima Daiichi accident. And their first meeting, who did they have to tell them about the accident but Tokyo Electric and the American Institute for Nuclear Preparedness? Now I've written a book on the accident, and I don't get an invite. And basically, the industry insiders are talking to the National Academy of Science. And we've had panels like that in the past, whether it's the 9/11 panel or the 3 Mile Island panel. But the National Academy of Sciences panel is made up of insiders. And who do they call to testify but more insiders?
Exactly right. And as you indicated, I think the public is still very hungry for the truth about this situation because they would know how they're going to be affected and what they can do about it. I noticed a lot of times that you share on not only this radio show but other radio shows, there's a lot of YouTubers that pick up the audio track, and there's websites that repost your information, and I really applaud all those people out there that are doing that, taking this information and taking it to the next step and dispersing it any and every way they can, because what you're presenting with us about what your situation is your understanding of the situation, I should say, is very important and sorely needed. And I wish more and more people would do the same. So we all thank you, Arnie, for what you guys are doing. And you just recently went. Go ahead.
This show will probably wind up in 3 different languages in the next 4 days. It's amazing.
Scary, isn't it? Well, tell us about what happened in Japan, why you went there, and what the results of that were, and what your conclusions, what you presented to the Japanese audience.
Yeah, I was sponsored by just a group of citizens, no organization or anything like that, and we didn't charge, but they paid my airfare over, and but in any event, I had pretty much a speech a day for 9 days, including to the Diet, which is their parliament. It was in the Diet office building, and there was about a dozen parliamentarians there, plus about 300 people. And the Japanese are different than the Americans. You don't get any feedback as a speaker. When you're an American speaker, the people will be nodding or giving you some kind of encouragement. And the Japanese are flat, and you got to get used to that. But so I gave a speech. It was 2 hours. And in it, I had showed slides of nuclear fuel burning. It's up on the Fairwinds website, and so the people had seen nuclear fuel burning in air, which is a Sandia National Labs test. So after I finished, I didn't realize it, but Tokyo Electric came in with NISA, the regulator, and they spoke for about 20 minutes about the fuel pool at Unit 4, which is everybody's concern, and how. Don't worry, in the next 5 years, they'll take care of it. So I got up then, and I asked, I said, real respectively, I said, I realize you don't believe that the fuel pool is going to crack in an earthquake. I understand that that's your position. I said, but if it does, have you pre-positioned chemicals on site to put out the fire? Because it's a special kind of fire. And they said, there's nothing in the fuel pool to burn. And the crowd went nuts. Wow. This was a crowd that's normally flat. They started screaming at Tokyo Electric. So it was, it was a switch. They were flat, and then they were the loudest crowd I've ever heard. So there's an enormous amount of distrust in Japan for the regulator, NISA, and also for Tokyo Electric.
And what you speak of, I believe 4 is 4 the one that's actually leaning and is very susceptible to further damage if a major earthquake happens?
Yeah, 4 is the one where all of the nuclear fuel is outside the containment. And if there was a major earthquake, it's likely the pool would crack because, like you said, it's leaning. It also has a crack on one side of it that Tokyo Electric tried to Photoshop out of one of the pictures, but they did such a poor job. It actually highlighted the crack. And it also has a bulge down low, which is something called a first mode Euler strut buckle, but in any event, it's a seismically induced bulge in the building. So, yeah, it will remain in jeopardy until they can get that fuel out of there.
Now, for regular listeners of Capital Farm, which is broadcast on RBN, will know that Tom Ritter, I'm a retired aerospace scientist, and having worked in that field for 20-plus years, a big part of any kind of engineering program is a project, is a lessons learned, as what you take away from any situation, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. You try to learn from your experience. And I noticed on one of your videos, your recent videos, you elaborate on some of the things that are going on and some of the lessons we should have learned. And can you share that with the audience this morning, what we should have learned and what they're doing with the information they learned and what they should be doing if they're not doing it correctly?
There's a bunch of lessons learned that are not being implemented in the United States. The first one is this what we call loss of the ultimate heat sink, and the question there is ultimate. You have to dump the heat from a nuclear reactor even after it's shut down. There's a lot of heat, and let's look at Fort Calhoun up there on the Missouri River. The river is the source of dumping the heat, and if you lose the river, either because it gets way too high or it gets way too low, you can't dump the heat from a nuclear reactor. Well, the NRC published, no, it didn't publish. They had an internal study of the risk of a plant being basically hit by a tsunami. But in the case of Fort Calhoun, it's not a tsunami. It's if an upstream dam were to burst, you would get the same effect as a tsunami. This dam would cascade down the Missouri and flood Fort Calhoun up to the level of above the control room. So it's a lot of water. And an NRC whistleblower came forward, and he said that the report is being suppressed by the NRC. The NRC's position was, well, it's a security matter. We don't want terrorists attacking our dams. But the whistleblower was clever enough, and he said, well, we already have talked to the Department of Homeland Security, and they don't care if the report is released. So the real reason the report was sequestered was that the NRC didn't want to be embarrassed by the fact that they've known that the Fort Calhoun plant up there on the Missouri is subject to a problem almost identical to Fukushima. The ultimate heat sink could flood the control room. Then you got another one down to the other side of you over in South Carolina. You guys are surrounded here. The Oconee units are downstream of a huge hydroelectric dam. Now hydroelectric dams don't fail very often, but neither do 65-foot tsunamis occur very often. And if that dam were to break, 3 nuclear plants would melt down for sure.
Wow.
And the NRC, again, has known about this for 15 years. And then they keep trying to sweep it under the rug, except for this NRC whistleblower coming forward. So that's just one lesson learned from Fukushima Daiichi that is
lesson not there you go, or not learned or not taken advantage of at least.
Yeah. The other ones are related to the containment. It's crystal clear that the containments leaked at Fukushima. If they didn't leak, there would have been no radiation releases. And the NRC is still assuming that the American reactors won't leak. They assume that all of the systems work, and that therefore we don't have to do any major modifications.
And on that note, we're going to take a pause for the commercial break. And one of the things that Arnie just mentioned was the nuclear plants on the Missouri River, and we had a major flood. The last major flood had those surrounded by water and bulging dams. So that was a near meltdown in that situation. Back in 3 minutes. And the interesting thing, Arnie, is that we live in an upside-down world right now, and everything is upside down, and they try to make people that talk out that actually have sanity as being insane because they're telling the truth, and they try to demonize people that are doing that. But that's an aside we don't need to go down necessarily right now because Arnie's going to share with us some more lessons learned. And by the way, everybody listening on RBNRepublicBroadcasting.org, you can listen to archives of previous Arnie visits to Capitol Forum. And I would recommend everybody subscribe to the archives, and you can check out other great shows on RBN. And also in the second hour, we're going to have a show on genetically modified organisms, and you'll want to tune into the second hour of today's show as well. Arnie, back to your lessons learned, if you don't mind. Let's finish up that issue of the cooling water to the power plants. So one, you can flood them, and people in Missouri and Nebraska don't think they're going to get a tsunami, but if a dam were to break, you would have the same thing as a tsunami. And again, these are low probability events with enormous consequences. And
nobody thought a 65-foot wall of water would hit the Daiichi units. So, but the flip side of that is the pumps along the water are susceptible to flooding. I've said, geez, like a week after the accident on CNN, I told America for the first time it wasn't about the diesels getting wiped out. They would have failed anyway, because, you got a cooling pump on the front of your car. The cooling pump for the diesels are the pumps along the water, and they had been destroyed. Well, the NRC isn't doing a darn thing about those. That's not even something they're looking at to solve in the next 5 years.
So you could put the diesel engines a mile away from the facility up and out of harm's way, but what you're indicating is they would still fail anyway because they would not be cooled by their design. Right.
The one thing that saved Daiichi 5 and 6 was one diesel was air-cooled. And that diesel didn't flood. It was in a location that didn't flood, and it had fans instead of relying on the ocean. And the guys, Herculean effort by a bunch of heroes, and my hats are off to the people that stayed behind at Daiichi and Daini, the two reactor sites that were worst hit. Really saved Japan and saved the world. And these guys were running jumpers from one plant to the other. As one plant started to heat up, they'd run the jumpers over there, cool it down a little bit, run the jumpers back to the other unit. So they were, they're working they had aftershocks. They didn't know whether their families were alive because they couldn't get communication to the outside world, high radiation, explosions, and they worked through it to save the country. So, but yeah, these diesels, and it runs up and down the coast. There was 14 nuclear plants, and all of them lost at least one diesel, not because the diesels were flooded, but because the cooling water to the diesels was wiped out by the tsunami. Now, that's a pretty big lesson. When you lose 24 out of 37 diesels because of the tsunami knocked out the cooling water, you would think that in the United States we'd do something about that, but it's not even what we call a Tier 1 concern by the NRC. They call it a Tier 3, which they're going to address 5 or 10 years out.
Amazing, and what you indicated is a simple fix to that solution would be to switch out the water-cooled to air-cooled engines. They may be a little bit less efficient, and there's trade-offs to that, but if you have something that's reliable no matter what happens, then that's a huge plus.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right.
Now, you also indicated that you wanted another level of governance because it seems like these the industry and obviously the utility companies are not in the best situation as far as handling with. They're not. The electric companies are not set up to handle disasters like this. This shouldn't be thrown on their lap, even though they provided the nuclear power plants. They don't have the facility or the means to actually deal with this situation.
Yeah, one of my lessons, my takeaways from the trip to Japan was that maybe Tokyo Electric can run a power plant. And let's set that aside for a minute. But they certainly are up against probably one of the most difficult engineering challenges in history, and they are totally incompetent to address it. They're not engineers. They don't think outside the box. So what I recommended when I was over there was that it's already nationalized. Tokyo Electric's already nationalized, but just spin off the Daiichi site and give it to a project management company that's with an engineering focus, and they would probably be inside the nuclear village because there's not many people like me outside the nuclear village. But then they should have an independent oversight group. And it shouldn't be the IAEA, which is the International Atomic Energy Agency, whose charter, by the way, is not to be a watchdog, but is to promote nuclear power. But they should get really independent people to sit on the board to give guidance and oversight to this project management team. Now, I was talking about that speech to the Diet, and Tokyo Electric had no engineering imagination. You worked on airplanes, and you've got to have people think outside the box and come up with creative solutions. And they just can't do that without independent experts looking over their shoulder.
That's amazing. And Everybody, please support RBN. You can exchange some Federal Reserve notes for some gold and silver at Republic Trading Group, and please spread the message, because we have one goal on RBN is try to get the truth out. Each host on the show has their own opinions, but the main goal is to try to get the information out so people can make up their own minds on what the situation is. Back in 3 minutes. Today's Sunday, September 23rd, 2012, and we're visiting with Arnie Gunnarsson from fairwinds.org, and that is fair, F-A-I-R-E, winds.org. And Arnie, I mentioned there needs to be a lot of other people exposing this information, and we had a guest on last week, Christina, and she's known as the Rad Chick, and her website is fukushimafacts.com, and she does a really good job of getting all the information out about what you're putting out, as well as some other experts, and some grassroots effort as well. So she's doing a tremendous job, and we applaud her effort and hope more and more people step up to the plate and help Arnie and Christina and others get the word out, because this is, unfortunately, Arnie, this is a gift that may keep giving for the rest of our lives and then future generations if we don't learn our lessons here and start making changes, not only in Fukushima, but in our own backyards. We could be having similar situations. And one of the questions I asked you during the break was, do you have any concerns when you fly, especially to Japan, because these aircraft have been flying in and out of Japan for years, and since this event, they've been collecting radiation. I would think it might be in the ventilation system.
We had aviation mechanics contacting us last year, March, April, May, who had detected high levels of radiation in the compressors that an airplane is held at about 2,500 feet of the pressure that's at 2,500 feet. And to do that, when you're way up high, they have to compress the atmosphere and run it through filters and pump it into the airplane. And we know that back in March, April, and May of last year, several planes landed in the United States, and the people got off, and they were radioactive, and it went away pretty quickly. But that would also imply the filters were radioactive. And we found that. We had radiation mechanics contacting us and telling us that the filters on the airplanes were highly contaminated. They had Geiger counters, too, and they were qualified to use them. We tried to get those filters, but the aviation companies wouldn't allow these guys to send them, and it's difficult, for job retention and stuff like that to sneak out a filter and send it to us. So we never got a filter, but we have all this data from aviation mechanics that indicate last year, not this year, but last year, March, April, May, the planes on those polar routes over to Japan and China and Taiwan and South Korea, and also Australia, were coming back with contaminated air filters.
So now, once again, is this a concern for us? If, say, for instance, we want to take a trip to Japan or wherever in the world, is this something that we need to be concerned with?
I'm not worried now. I just flew to Japan and back, and I wasn't worried about the air quality on the plane. I know I picked up a couple millirem as I flew, but it was external from cosmic rays and over my entire body as opposed to localized like a hot particle. But I was very concerned back in March, April, and May of last year when the accident was off-gassing an enormous amount of radioactivity.
Can a person wear a dosimeter when you go on a trip like that, or think they're exposed at all? Is that a good idea if a person's really concerned about that? Obviously the average person wouldn't do that, but there are people that want to avoid these things in all situations. So is that an option?
You can, and you'll find you'll pick up something on the order of 2 millirem on a flight to Japan, maybe 3. The flight crews actually are monitored and have picked up radiation for years. But again, it's cosmic radiation that you'd be exposed to whether or not you were whether or not Fukushima Daiichi had happened or not. So if you were willing to take the risk before the accident, there's really no change in risk after the accident at this point. Again, March, April, May of last year was a different story.
Okay. Now, we hear reports that there's a city called Kawasaki in Japan, and the mayor is actually, I don't know if he's proud or defending or justifying, but he's indicating that they're feeding radiated food to the school children on purpose so they can learn about the dangers of radiation, if I'm not mistaken. Do you know anything about that situation?
Yes. It's happening throughout the Fukushima prefecture and the surrounding prefectures where there's it's almost viewed as a patriotic duty to keep these farmers in business. So therefore, people, especially towns and governments, are trying to buy from farmers who are selling contaminated food. There's a lot of social stigma in the school systems. Teachers are being told to ostracize kids whose parents don't want to eat the food. When I was over in, one of the most moving things I had when I was in Japan last week was a woman came up to me in tears out in the hallway after I gave my speech, and she said, "I want to thank you." And her English was very good. And she said that she lived in Fukushima City, and she had wanted to move, and her husband said, "No, the government tells me everything is safe." And she says, "Well, we're going to get divorced. I'm going to take our kids, and I'll move in with you or without you." And that they had this dialogue for a couple of weeks, and he agreed to watch Fairwind's videos. And after watching Fairwind's videos, she said, "I'm coming with you." So she credits Fairwind's videos as saving her marriage. I didn't know I was into marriage counseling. But it's common there where the women are concerned about next generation and their kids. And what we're seeing is a real schism between the men who are sort of authoritarian and this is a hierarchical country who want to believe the government, and the women realize that the government's been lying to them. So we're seeing a breakdown in family structure and a breakdown in government structure because essentially they've alienated half the registered voters in the country. The women are leading the protest movement in Japan right now,
and justifiably so. They're concerned about their family, and then the motherly instinct really takes over in situations like this. Thank goodness.
We've seen an increase in. They're not tumors. They're called nodules in the thyroid. And I had said in a video we put up, almost a year ago, that kids would be more susceptible than adults, and young girls would be more susceptible than boys. And no one knows why the girl-boy difference, but certainly young people with their rapidly growing cells are more prone to cancers and these lumps that are precancerous. Well, we're finding now that girls are having as much as twice as many thyroid lumps as boys. The moms had a real legitimate reason to get their families out of there.
And by the way, the website is Fairwinds, and Fair spelled with an E on the end, and that's fairwinds.org. So I'd recommend everybody that's checking this information out, please check out his website. And Arnie and Maggie are doing a tremendous job of getting the word out on various media outlets, and they put most of that up on their website. So a great resource to keep informed about what's going on in this situation. Now, for people that have been contacting me wanting to know if their produce is safe, if they could send it to a lab someplace, a lot of people are even putting in greenhouses, and justifiably so, because we never know what the future holds. This is a one-off event, and it may or may not be affecting each and every one of us right now, but sooner or later there could be events happening in our backyard. So what can we be doing now? Our greenhouse is part of the answer, is getting in a relationship with a local lab. What should we be doing now to circumvent this if it happens to us?
Well, I would, I'm not buying any produce from Japan, and I'm not buying any fish from the Pacific. I'm eating from the Atlantic. But as far as we have a lot of organic farmers in Vermont, and we're at a point now where this radiation's pretty well evenly distributed, and we can't run and we can't hide. Now, if Unit 4 blows, then we're back to March 11th last year. But keep an eye on Unit 4, of course. But short of that, it's in the soil, and it's not going to go away. So we're going to live with this background radiation until it decays away in a couple hundred years, and that's just life in the nuclear era. It's unfortunate, but I don't know how to get away from it. I had someone say they were leaving Oregon and they were moving to Louisiana, and I said, well, have you looked at the cancer statistics in Louisiana?
Oh, we hate to laugh about that, Arnie, but we're living in such a...
You get to the point where you run away from one and you wind up locating next to another. So I guess I get to the point where you can't run and you can't hide anymore.
Right, but there probably are certain mitigation things we could do. I would suggest maybe looking into zeolites or boron or different elements you could put into the soil that you might want to put into your garden. I think there are some solutions towards that, isn't there, Arnie?
Yeah, I think we talked about this last time. Zeolite is really good at removing cesium, but it also removes other things, so you wind up having to supplement. And if you're willing to supplement, then zeolite is effective.
I wonder, would that be, we talked about that, doing that internally, but I guess my question was towards putting that in your garden. Would that also chelate and absorb the minerals where your plants wouldn't be able to absorb the minerals in? Or do you know the answer to that?
I'm out of my pay grade here, sorry.
Fair enough. Well, what are some other lessons learned that we could be doing right now that we're not doing here in the United States?
Well, let's talk about these 23 reactors. You don't have any within 100 miles of you, but up and down the East Coast, there's a whole bunch of reactors that are identical to Fukushima and Daiichi, and also near Chicago as well. And what for years, people had known that the containments were too small. These 23 reactors, the containment is 1/6 the size of other containments. So the NRC stuck vents on the side of it, and the theory was that if the containment was in jeopardy, you'd open up and let the radioactive gases out. Now that seems to me to be counterproductive to what a containment is all about. But the NRC is now studying whether those vents should be allowed to continue. And this is amazing. It shows the pressure that the nuclear industry is applying to the NRC. They are saying, well, we should put a vent, which is essentially, a pipe, a hole in the side of the containment with a valve on it, open and close it. But we don't want to spend the money to put a filter on that vent. So that would trap the radiation that was released. So the NRC is in the process of allowing what they call hardened vents, but no filter on the vents. So when they open this pipe up, the radiation that's in the containment is going to come right out. Now, one of the commissioners, there's two commissioners that are so pro-nuclear they may as well go to work for Westinghouse. But and that's Commissioner Magwood and Commissioner Svinicki. Anyway, Commissioner Svinicki said, well, we don't need vents because we know there'll never be any core damage to release the radiation. We don't need filters, rather, because we know there'll be no core damage. Well, if there's no core damage, you don't need the vent at all. So, she said, well, we need the vents, but we're really, I'm sure what the message to the industry is I'm going to vote against putting a filter on this because I don't want to run up the cost to generate nuclear power. It's really a trade-off. You can make nuclear plants much safer, but they can't compete economically in the marketplace. Even now, without all these TMI fixes, nuclear is not the low-cost provider. It's hydroelectric and natural gas are low-cost providers now. Nuclear is maybe third or fourth. And if you throw in all these TMI mods, Fukushima mods, you're likely to cause these plants to shut down, especially the small units like Fort Calhoun up there on the Missouri. They just can't amortize the cost for these modifications over a very small power output. And the industry doesn't want to shut down nuclear plants, even though they're uneconomical. So we're stuck in a bind right now. As citizens, I think we've got to demand more of our legislature, but pretty much every legislator is receiving funds from the nuclear industry. And it's not Republican, Democrats. They all are, with the exception of maybe 3 or 4 that really are concerned about nuclear safety.
And unfortunately, that's not atypical when you get into any major industry. It seems like that's the situation. And you indicated they if they're not working from, they should be. But ultimately, if you look at where their campaign donations and where their money comes from, it's these big industries, and that's why they send them a favorable result. But a big part of why the nuclear industry is there is because it is subsidized by the taxpayers' money, and that's why I like to say.
I listened to an eloquent 16-minute speech by Dennis Kucinich, who's a really very liberal Democratic representative up in the Cleveland area, and he's through redistricting he's lost his seat for the starting in January. But he has actually made a liaison with so he's a liberal Dem. There's no doubt about it, and he'll say that right out. But he's actually made a liaison with the conservative Tea Party Republicans on this issue of subsidizing these nuclear power plants. You and I right now are signing notes, loan guarantees, so that people in Georgia and South Carolina can build nuclear power plants. Well, when those notes go sour, and they will go sour because the cost is so astronomical compared to other means of producing power, you and I are on the hook for it. So it's actually a link between the liberal Democrats who don't want nuclear power and the conservative Tea Party Republicans who don't want federal involvement that is likely to put an end to loan guarantees, which is certainly an example of probably the most subsidized industry in the world.
Wow. And if you're going to have welfare, you don't need welfare to these corporate entities, these globalist corporations, which have, literally print money out of thin air. So I could see his point on that and why that correlation came to exist.
We always talk about gridlock in Washington, and here's an example of spanning the gridlock, and I thought that was a really positive example.
Exactly, and sometimes if they're trying to do bad stuff to us, gridlock is a positive thing, but sometimes not. One of the few reports that did come out of what the government is testing, and that's one of the problems we have here is the government's not releasing information, is the tuna situation. At 15 out of 15, I believe, tested positive. Where is the current results? Because this was, I don't know, by now it's probably been over a year old results. So what is the latest on that? Are we getting any good information of what the government is seeing as far as food and air and water? Are they giving us any information at all?
Everything you said is exactly right. The last tuna data was a year old, and nothing has been published since then. Now, I don't know. It's hard to believe that researchers don't have the data. I'm sure that as a follow-up from that, somebody was collecting tuna data. But whether the journals are sitting on it, and we know scientific journals have stopped publication of some of this data.
Hey, Arnie, I hate to interrupt you right there, but we must stop for the break. Welcome back to Capital Farmer. We're going to cut the music short so we can get back to Arnie because we have limited time left with Arnie. We want to let him finish his thoughts. What I would recommend everybody do, if you enjoy listening to Arnie, don't just sit back and enjoy it. Actually contribute, because Arnie's out there on the front line doing this. He and his wife are not profiting from this, but they do need help financing the website because bandwidth, servers, all this takes money, and they're spending their own personal money, and they'd like to have a donation come in to help finance that, but to offset some of their personal investments. So if you go to fairwinds.org, please use the chip-in PayPal and help Arnie and Maggie finance their operation there to keep them going, because a lot of people are reposting their information, and even if you repost their information, please put a link in your description back to their website, and that will help Arnie and help keep them going and keeping this good information flowing so we know what's going on in the nuclear world. Arnie, back to you.
Well, let's finish up our thought on the scientists and measuring in fish and the soils and in. It seems like especially what's going on in the Pacific right now. I'm sure that scientists are taking data, and I'm sure that they are trying to get their data published. We're seeing a lot of resistance in the major scientific journals, the peer-reviewed journals, to allowing this information to get through, because again, the peer-reviewed journals are controlled by this nuclear priesthood, so it's difficult, and hopefully some more good science will come up that we can talk about next time. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was this nuclear village and how it's co-opted the National Academy of Sciences study on Fukushima. Now, they're not supposed to report back to Congress till 2014, so there's essentially 18 months here before the report goes to Congress. But already you can see where it's going. You know, the deck is stacked. All the people on the National Academy's oversight panel are all either academians that work with the nuclear industry, and a couple of them are actually retired nuclear industry guys. And the people they're asking to appear in front of them are Tokyo Electric and the Institute of Nuclear Preparedness. And so we're seeing the data, the evaluators of the data and the people providing the data are basically agreeing ahead of time that to the outcome of the report. And that concerns me. It's really not going to be an objective report the way it's stacked right now.
Yeah, and that's a shame. And thank goodness that whistleblowers such as yourself, or just informers such as yourself, are just dispersing information that we need to know and need to become watchdogs. And I think no matter what the industry is, Arnie, we need good people to actually get engaged in the system and start watching. You know, we need to watch our legislators, and we need to watch these corporations. Everybody's just sitting back and waiting for somebody else to do the job for us. Well, we need to look in the mirror and say, hey, it's up to me. It's up to good people like yourself and Christina, and good programs like the ones that are on RBN to actually spread the message and try to help change the world and start moving in a more positive direction. And that's one of the really takeaways I noticed in your Japan tour is you told them they had an opportunity to move into alternate energy and be a world leader.
Yeah, you know, and one, they should do it because, you know, considering that their country is highly seismic, and of all the places on the planet where you'd want to not put a nuclear plant, it's Japan. But the flip side of it is they can make money. I mean, the Germans are exporting more to China than they're receiving from China. Well, what do the Germans know? They've figured out a way of making money. So, yeah, I think if the Japanese wanted to think outside the box, they could become world leaders in a renewable technology.